Branford Marsalis, you scored Ma Rainey's Black Bottom, and I feel like this was a match made in heaven. Do you feel that way too?
In a way, yeah, in a way, because I'd done a couple of 1920 style deep dives. Most modern players don't really invest much time in early music, which I don't understand. But they
Children
really
learn.
but they really don't. I don't know what that is. Well, I guess I do. I guess I do know what it is, because I grew up in the South, in the Southern US, and Southern folks are very traditional. And the roots of mostly all American music are rural. The roots of most music in the world is rural. It starts in farmlands and folk villages and things like that. And sometimes when individuals are pressing for the concept of modernity, as opposed to actual modernity, they want to discard anything that is a reminder of a past that they're not especially good at. So they kind of charge forward, and they're not interested in learning a music that they can't figure out a way to monetize. It becomes a very transactional relationship. So
I mean, that's kind of like Levy in the movie.
Yes, exactly. Like that. That's exactly what it is. And
well, did that play a part in how you wanted to like score his scenes and his sound? Because he does want to push envelope and modernize Ma Rainey's sound, and everyone else is content to keep the status quo.
No, because of the way that I listen to music, I knew how I would do that for him, given the times. I mean, you really can't make it sound like some really modern stuff in the 1940s. It would be a disconnect. But if I were to try to modernize traditional music in the 20s, because I understood it in terms of instrumentation and delivery, you just make the song, it's basically the song is a little more faster. It has a jumpier beat, and there's more motion on the trumpet. But no, I didn't really use that emotion, because the emotion that best suits Levy in general is rage. And the rage for the multitude of tragedies in his life is the driving force for his push for modernity. So I didn't get distracted by the outward idea of I'm trying to bring this music into the 1927, but the purpose behind it was just a way, like trying to find a way to mask all of the hurt and the pain that he felt from prior situations in his life.
Yeah, and it all comes to a head at the end when he has his meltdown, and the percussive score really captures that rage. So how did you write that part?
Well, George Wolfe, the director, he's an interesting character, because he wants you to write a lot of music, but in fact, when it comes to music, he's more of a minimalist. And one of the constants with George, when you're talking about movies that involve Black people, particularly from the South, is that he loves percussion and he loves the sound of the blues guitar. So there was a constant push and pull between things that I would write. He would say, "Oh, that sounds too classical." It's particularly as a drummer named Baby Dodds, who was very popular in the 1920s, and he loves Baby Dodds. I've worked on 2 films with George, and in both films, he sent me resource tracks from Baby Dodds. I think in these scenes that have great conflict, he really does like the sound of the drums. So it was just a matter of, we were doing most of the recording in New Orleans, because that's a place where the musicians still play a lot of parades. So they have these kind of outside voices that musicians in the 20s would have had, and they understand the style. So I found the one guy in New Orleans who exactly plays like Baby Dodds. His name is Shannon Powell. I called Shannon. I said, "Man, he wants you to play like Baby Dodds." I sent him the track. He comes in, he plays it exactly like that. And then George says, "Maybe it was just a point of reference. Yeah, this isn't really what I'm looking for." And I said, "Well, now that I know what you're actually looking for, I know the guy we could have used, but he's in Philadelphia right now. So we had to record it later. We had to record it a couple of weeks later when we got back to the East Coast. And we used the drummer, Justin Faulkner. He says, yeah, that's what I was looking for. That's great. I said, well, so why did you send me Baby Dodge?
Well, you had to capture the sound of 1920s blues, but also kind of blend your music with Ma Rainey's real catalog of songs. So what kind of challenge did that present?
Well, the biggest challenge, because I knew the musicians I wanted to hire. And if you listen to any of Ma Rainey's recordings, they are some of the small chamber recordings where it's just her and a pianist. But most of the time, she has piano, acoustic bass or no bass, saxophone, clarinet, tuba. But when August Wilson wrote the play, he basically wrote the play for 4 musicians in Ma Rainey. So I'm starting to conceptualize all these musicians to hire, and I started sending George these temp tracks, and he says, too many musicians. Read the play. There's only cornet, trombone, piano, and bass, and Ma. So suddenly I'm like, well, roll all of that out. So it was more the idea of listening to the music and using it, figuring out in my mind which musicians to hire and how to space out the instrumentation so that it works.
Mm-hmm. So what kind of instrumentation did you land on?
I landed on what August Wilson wrote. Trombone, piano, and acoustic bass.
Exactly what George wanted.
So but a couple of musicians from New Orleans who play traditional New Orleans music, and they would be perfect for the part because they know how to play background lines. Modern music, all the musicians tend to want to be in the front. Mm-hmm. But in a situation playing with a singer, you had to find musicians who were comfortable playing in a support situation. And I found 4 really great musicians, and we put the songs down, and George was pleasantly surprised. It was nice.
What was the recording process like?
There's a funny part of the recording process. When we recorded the first song, which is the first song we recorded was the first song in the movie, which is called Deep Moanin' Blues. So I've been listening, like I told you prior, to these songs for decades. And we start recording the song. And I said, it's not right. It's the very first song. So everybody said, what do you mean it's not right? I'm like, it's not. He said, well, what's wrong? I said, I don't know yet. Can you play it again, please? And I'm listening. I said, yeah, stop. It's not right. And I basically walked in the studio for about 30 minutes, scrolling through my head about what do we have or what did they have that we don't have? And then it hit me. We have a 9-foot grand piano out there. It needs to be an upright piano and out of tune as possible, as out of tune as possible. So we switched out the grand, we put in the upright, we called the piano tuner and said, hey, I got a special request for you, bruh. I need you to detune the piano. And he says, hell, well, almost every club in New Orleans has an upright and almost all of them are out of tune. So I know exactly what that sounds like. So he came over and detuned the piano. And I said, man, that's perfect. And as soon as we started playing, everybody said, that's the sound. I said, so it was really funny how important the upright piano was to the sound in the 20s and not being perfectly in tune. Mm-hmm. And then it was it really had that honky tonk quality that a lot of those recordings did have. So the recording process, once we got past that, was fun. It was just a matter of me having sort of this metaphorical ruler to wrap the hands of the musicians anytime they played something that was outside of what musicians in the 20s would play. Because clearly we don't live in the 20s, so our natural inclinations are to play more modern sound. So I had to stop and say, nope, 40 years too soon. Go back, try it again. And
you're too advanced for this movie. You bring it back.
Yes, that's right. So but it worked out well.
Yeah. Oh, there are a lot of monologues in the film because obviously it was a play. But so what was your approach to those scenes? Because, scoring an entire monologue would probably be overkill.
I scored the entire monologue. Mm-hmm. And as I said earlier, George is kind of a minimalist. So I wrote whatever I thought should be there, knowing that George is going to use the things that he feels should be there. But rather than try to read George's mind per se, I just wrote it like the Levy. No, is it Levy? Yeah, Levy's monologue. Levy's monologue was written for piano, acoustic bass, clarinet, solo clarinet, and 16 strings. And I think that in the end, George used maybe the violin one and parts of the clarinet.
It's probably better for you to do the whole thing and then have him pick and choose.
Yeah, I think that's the best way to work with George, because I'm almost 100% positive. Had I written it in the way that he used it, he would have said, "It's not enough. I need more." So, you know,
what kind of other notes did George have for you?
What kind of what?
What other notes did George have for you?
In the Toledo monologue, which is Glenn Turman's character, Leftovers, I was listening to him, to Glenn, to Toledo, say the words. I got a recording of him, and I put the recording on, and I walked around Pittsburgh for hours just listening to it. And then I started to write this piece, and it's a piano piece, but the structure of it is very classical. And then when I wrote it for piano, 16 strings, and a 5-piece woodwind, oboe, 2 clarinets, flute, bassoon. As soon as George heard it, he goes, "Too classical. I like the piece, but it's too classical." I'm like, "This is perfect for what he's talking about." He says, "Nope, it's got to be bluesy." So I took the exact same piece, and the piano player who lives in New York, I got on the phone with him. And I said, "We have to turn this piece into a blues, but not a traditional 12-bar blues, just a blues sound." So it's basically based on 2 chords. The first chord, and find that second chord for me. And he played a second chord. I went, "Nope, not that, not that." And then he played a chord. I said, "That chord." Take those 2 chords and move them back and forth and play the melody across those 2 chords. And then as a musician, make the necessary harmonic adjustments when you get to certain parts of the melody. And he played it for me over the phone. I said, "That's perfect, man." So he went into the studio and he recorded it the next day, and George heard it and said, "Yeah, that's great. Blues. That's it. That's great." So
it's always the second thing with him.
Yep. But I'm glad. So on the soundtrack, we have the way I wrote it and then the way George wanted it. So we get 2 songs for the price of 1.
And then you'll let the fans decide which one they like more.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Well, Branford, it was great speaking with you. Thank you so much for your time. And we'll see you back in a little bit.
My pleasure, Joyce. Take care.